The room was quiet, almost unbearably so, except for the soft hum of a recording console and the distant echo of footsteps in a hallway that seemed to stretch endlessly into darkness. A lone figure sat under a single light, head bowed, hands trembling slightly as if holding back a storm that had raged inside him for years. In that moment, Michael Jackson was not the king of pop, not a global icon, not a legend. He was simply a son, silently reaching for the one person who had always been his lifeline. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you never miss another untold story. This is not just the story of Michael Jackson's rise to fame. This is the story of survival, of a soul stretched thin by pressure, expectation, and loneliness. And at the heart of it all stood one woman, his mother, Katherine Jackson, quietly holding together the fragile pieces of a boy who grew up too fast, a man who carried the weight of the world, and a legend who never stopped searching for peace. To understand how Katherine Jackson saved Michael Jackson's soul, we must return to a time before the glittering stages, before the screaming crowds, before the moonwalk became immortalized in pop culture. We must go back to Gary, Indiana, a small, industrial town where steel mills roared day and night, and where the Jackson family lived in a modest home that echoed not with luxury, but with discipline, music, and tension. Michael Jackson was born on August 29, 1958, the eighth of 10 children. From the moment he could speak, he could sing. From the moment he could walk, he could dance. His talent was undeniable, almost supernatural. But talent in the Jackson household was not a gift, it was an expectation. His father, Joseph Jackson, saw music as a path out of poverty and drilled his children with military-like precision. Rehearsals were long, mistakes were punished, and fear became a constant companion. In contrast, Katherine Jackson was the quiet warmth in a home often shadowed by intensity. Where Joe demanded perfection, Katherine offered compassion. Where discipline hardened the walls of the household, Katherine softened them with faith, gentleness, and unconditional love. She taught her children not only how to sing, but how to believe in God, in kindness, and in themselves. Michael Jackson would later say that his mother was the one person who truly understood him. While the world saw a prodigy, Katherine saw a child. A sensitive, shy boy who loved animals, who cried easily, who feared loud voices, and who needed reassurance more than applause. As the Jackson 5 burst onto the scene in the late 1960s, Michael Jackson was thrust into global fame at an age when most children were still learning how to be children. His voice soared across radios, his smile lit up televisions, and his image became instantly recognizable. But behind the scenes, the pressure was relentless. Long tour, exhausting rehearsals, endless interviews, and little room for mistakes. For Michael Jackson, childhood became something he performed for others but never truly lived. Katherine Jackson watched this transformation with a mixture of pride and concern. She was proud of her son's success but deeply worried about what it was doing to his spirit. She saw how tired he was, how anxious he became, how he flinched at criticism, how he tried desperately to please everyone, his father, his producers, his fans, while slowly losing himself in the process. At night, when the house finally grew quiet, Katherine would sit with Michael. She would pray with him, talk to him, hold his hand when he cried. She would remind him that he was loved not for his talent, not for his fame, but simply because he was her son. Michael Jackson once said that when he felt overwhelmed, he would imagine his mother's voice calming him, telling him everything would be okay. For a child growing up in a world that constantly demanded more than he could give, that reassurance was everything. But even a mother's love can only protect so much. As Michael Jackson grew older, his fame intensified. His transition from child star to solo artist was not just successful, it was historic. Albums like Off the Wall, Thriller, and Bad shattered records and redefined the music industry. He became the most famous human being on the planet. Yet, as the world watched his brilliance, few saw the quiet suffering behind the scenes. Michael Jackson struggled deeply with identity. Years of criticism about his appearance, especially his skin tone, his nose, and his weight, left him feeling inadequate. He battled vitiligo, a skin condition that changed his pigmentation, and lupus, which affected his health and appearance. Instead of compassion, he was met with speculation, ridicule, and relentless media scrutiny. The more famous he became, the lonelier he felt. In moments of exhaustion and emotional pain, Michael Jackson turned to his mother. He called her late at night. He wrote her letters. He confided in her when he felt misunderstood by the world. Katherine Jackson became not just his mother, but his emotional anchor, his therapist, his spiritual guide, and his safe place. Michael Jackson's home, Neverland Ranch, was often described as a child's paradise, with amusement rides, animals, and elaborate fantasy spaces. Many saw it as eccentric, but for Michael, it was something far more personal, an attempt to recreate the childhood he never had. And Katherine understood that. She knew that behind the grandeur of Neverland was a wounded boy searching for peace. She visited often. She prayed with him. She listened when he spoke about his fears. She never judged his choices, even when she didn't fully understand them. Instead, she offered what she always had: unconditional love. One of the most profound aspects of Katherine Jackson's influence on Michael Jackson was her spiritual guidance. As a devout Jehovah's Witness, Katherine raised her children with strong religious values. Michael took these beliefs seriously, especially during his early years. Though his faith evolved over time, the spiritual foundation his mother gave him remained deeply embedded in his psyche. When Michael Jackson felt lost, he turned not to the world but to prayer. When he felt attacked, he sought forgiveness rather than revenge. When he felt broken, he searched for healing, not destruction. This moral compass, shaped by Katherine, helped him navigate a life that could easily have destroyed him. But the true test of Katherine Jackson's influence came during the darkest chapter of Michael Jackson's life. In 1993, allegations of child abuse surfaced against Michael Jackson. The media storm was immediate and brutal. Overnight, he was no longer just a superstar. He was a headline, a scandal, a target. His face was plastered across tabloids. His name was debated in courtrooms and living rooms around the world. His character was dissected, mocked, and condemned long before any legal conclusion was reached. For Michael Jackson, this was not just a legal battle, it was a spiritual collapse. He felt betrayed, abandoned, humiliated. He stopped trusting people. He withdrew from public life. He lost weight. He struggled to sleep. He struggled to breathe under the weight of the accusations. And once again, he turned to his mother. Katherine Jackson stood by her son when many others turned away. She believed in his innocence. She supported him emotionally, spiritually, and psychologically. She visited him when he was hospitalized. She prayed over him. She reminded him of who he was: not the headlines, not the rumors, not the accusations, but the child she raised, the son she loved, the human being beneath the fame. Michael Jackson later admitted that during this time, he considered ending his life. It was Katherine Jackson who stopped him. She spoke to him not as a manager, not as a public figure, but as a mother who refused to lose her child. She told him that his life mattered, that his pain was real, but it was not the end, that his children, the ones he would later have, deserved a father, that the world, despite its cruelty, still needed his voice, his message, and his music. Her words did not erase his pain, but they gave him something more powerful: hope. After the settlement and the collapse of his public image, Michael Jackson retreated further into isolation. His trust in the world was shattered. His trust in people was broken. Yet, through it all, Katherine remained. She visited him regularly. She encouraged him to seek help. She urged him to take care of his health. She reminded him to rest, to eat, to breathe. She became his emotional lifeline, holding him steady when the world seemed determined to pull him apart. In the early 2000s, another trial followed, even more devastating than the first. Once again, Michael Jackson found himself on trial in the court of public opinion. Once again, the media frenzy was merciless. Once again, his soul was under siege. And once again, Katherine Jackson stood by him. She sat in court. She held his hand. She prayed for him. She defended him publicly and privately. She refused to abandon him, even when the pressure was unbearable, even when standing by her son meant standing alone. When Michael Jackson was acquitted in 2005, he was free legally, but emotionally he was exhausted. He left the United States shortly afterward, seeking peace in Bahrain, Ireland, and other countries. Yet no matter where he went, he remained tethered to his mother. He called her often. He asked for her advice. He sought her comfort. Katherine Jackson was not just his mother, she was his sanctuary. In 2009, Michael Jackson announced his comeback tour, This Is It. It was meant to be his return to the stage, his redemption, his final triumph. Rehearsals were intense. The pressure was immense. His health was fragile. His sleep was irregular. His stress was overwhelming. Katherine Jackson sensed something was wrong. She expressed concern about his physical and emotional state. She worried about the pace of the rehearsals. She feared he was being pushed too hard. She urged him to rest, to slow down, to take care of himself. But Michael Jackson, ever the perfectionist, ever the people-pleaser, felt he had to prove himself to the world, to the industry, to his fans. On June 25, 2009, the world stopped. Michael Jackson was found unresponsive in his home in Los Angeles. Attempts to revive him failed. He was pronounced dead at the age of 50. The news sent shockwaves across the globe. Fans wept. Streets filled with mourners. Music stations played his songs nonstop. Landmarks lit up in his honor. The world mourned not just a star, but a symbol, a sound, a soul. But no one mourned more deeply than Katherine Jackson. She lost not a legend, but her son. In the days following Michael Jackson's death, Katherine emerged as the emotional anchor of the Jackson family. She spoke with grace, dignity, and sorrow. She thanked fans for their love. She honored her son's legacy. And most importantly, she took responsibility for his children, Prince, Paris, and Blanket, becoming their legal guardian. Once again, Katherine Jackson stepped into the role of protector. Michael Jackson's children had lost their father. The world had lost an icon. But Katherine refused to let them lose stability, love, and safety. She moved them into her home. She provided structure. She shielded them from media attention. She raised them with the same values she raised Michael: faith, kindness, humility, and love. In interviews, Michael Jackson's children have spoken about their grandmother with deep affection and gratitude. They describe her as gentle, patient, and unwavering in her support. They credit her with giving them a sense of normalcy in a world that constantly tried to define them by their father's fame. In doing so, Katherine Jackson continued what she had always done, saving Michael's soul, even after his death, by protecting the part of him that lived on through his children. But the true impact of Katherine Jackson's love on Michael Jackson cannot be measured in court victories, career milestones, or public statements. It can only be measured in the quiet moments, the late-night phone calls, the whispered prayers, the silent tears, the hand held in darkness, the voice that said, "You are not alone." Michael Jackson once said, "My mother is my anchor. She's the one who keeps me grounded. Without her, I don't know where I'd be." Those were not empty words. Without Katherine Jackson, Michael Jackson might have been consumed by the pressures of fame, destroyed by the cruelty of public judgment, or lost to despair long before his time. Her love did not prevent his pain, but it gave him the strength to survive it. In many ways, Michael Jackson's music was a reflection of his relationship with his mother. Songs about innocence, healing, love, forgiveness, and hope echoed the values she instilled in him. His humanitarian work, his donations, his hospital visits, his advocacy for children mirrored her compassion. Even in his darkest songs there was light. Even in his sorrow there was grace. Even in his brokenness there was beauty. And at the center of that beauty was a mother who never stopped believing in him. When we listen to Michael Jackson's music today, when we hear his voice, see his dance, feel his emotion, we are not just witnessing talent. We are witnessing survival. We are hearing the echoes of a boy who endured unimaginable pressure and a man who carried unimaginable pain, yet never stopped striving to love, to heal, and to give. And behind that voice always was Katherine Jackson, the quiet force who saved his soul. Michael Jackson was more than a superstar, he was a son. And Katherine Jackson was more than a mother, she was his lifeline. In a world that often celebrated his brilliance while ignoring his humanity, she never forgot that he was human first, vulnerable, sensitive, in need of love. Her love did not make headlines. It did not win awards. It did not sell records. But it did something far more powerful. It kept Michael Jackson alive when the world threatened to break him. And even after his death, her influence continues to shape his legacy, through his children, through his values, and through the enduring message of his music. That love, compassion, and kindness matter more than fame, wealth, or power. Michael Jackson once sang, "Heal the world, make it a better place, for you and for me and the entire human race." Those were not just lyrics, they were lessons passed down from a mother who believed in healing before headlines, compassion before controversy, and love before judgment. This is not just a story about fame, it is a story about motherhood, about resilience, about faith, about the quiet power of unconditional love. It is the story of Michael Jackson and the mother who saved his soul. The story does not end with Michael Jackson's final breath. In many ways, that was only the beginning of a new chapter, one written not on stages or in studios, but in memory, legacy, and the quiet endurance of a mother who had already carried her son through life's darkest storms. In the days after Michael Jackson's death, the world stood still, but Katherine Jackson stood firm. Cameras followed her everywhere, outside courtrooms, through memorials, into her home, yet behind the lenses was a woman grappling not with the loss of an icon but with the loss of her child. She did not collapse in public. She did not shout or rage. Instead, she mourned in the same way she had always loved, quietly, deeply, and with dignity. Those who knew her said she slept very little in the first weeks. When she did, it was often with Michael's music playing softly in the background, as if his voice could somehow bridge the impossible distance between life and death. She reread old letters. She looked through photographs. She sat in rooms he once filled with laughter, silence, and vulnerability. And in that silence, Katherine Jackson made a choice. She would not let Michael Jackson's story end in pain. She would not allow the world to define him solely by controversy, speculation, or tragedy. She would not allow his children to grow up in the shadow of rumors. She would not allow the wounds he carried to be the final chapter of his life. Instead, she chose to protect his humanity. She chose to preserve his heart. She chose to carry his soul forward. Katherine Jackson took on the guardianship of Michael's 3 children, Prince, Paris, and Blanket, not as a formality but as a sacred responsibility. She saw in their eyes the same vulnerability she had once seen in Michael's, the same confusion, the same longing for stability, the same fear of a world that watched them not as children but as symbols. She understood, perhaps better than anyone, that the greatest danger they faced was not the media, not fame, not even grief. It was isolation. Michael Jackson had grown up surrounded by people, yet deeply alone. Katherine would not let that happen again. She created a home that was calm, structured, and grounded. She ensured their schooling was consistent. She limited their exposure to media. She taught them values not just about success, but about humility, kindness, respect, and faith. She gave them what Michael had been denied, a childhood that was not a performance. In doing so, Katherine Jackson was not only protecting her grandchildren, she was healing the part of Michael Jackson that had never healed. Because every bedtime story she read to them was a story she wished she could have read to Michael without the pressure of rehearsals. Every quiet dinner they shared was a moment Michael rarely experienced without cameras or schedules. Every ordinary day they lived was an extraordinary gift, one Michael had always longed for. And in those moments, Catherine felt her son close. Not as a ghost, not as a memory, but as a presence woven into the laughter of his children, the music still echoing through the house, the values he lived by still shaping lives. Michael Jackson's spirit did not leave this world, it simply changed form. But even as Catherine focused on the future, the past continued to haunt her. Michael Jackson's life was a tapestry of brilliance and pain, woven together in ways few could truly understand. Catherine had witnessed it all: the rehearsals, the tears, the triumphs, the breakdowns, the prayers whispered in dark rooms, the phone calls filled with fear and confusion. She knew the parts of Michael Jackson the world never saw. She knew how deeply he was hurt by betrayal. She knew how much criticism wounded him. She knew how hard he tried to please everyone, often at the cost of his own well-being. She knew how much he needed reassurance. She knew how fragile his heart truly was. And yet she also knew how fiercely he loved. Michael Jackson loved his fans with sincerity. He loved children with genuine compassion. He loved animals, nature, and beauty. He loved art, poetry, and silence. He loved peace. He loved healing. He loved humanity, even when humanity did not love him back. Catherine Jackson had nurtured that love. From his earliest years, she taught him to see people not as competitors but as souls. She taught him that success meant nothing if it did not serve others. She taught him that kindness was not weakness but strength. She taught him that faith was not about fear but about hope. Those lessons became the foundation of Michael Jackson's life, even when the world tried to strip them away. As years passed after his death, the public narrative surrounding Michael Jackson continued to evolve. New documentaries were released, old controversies resurfaced, debates reignited, opinions clashed. Social media amplified every voice, every judgment, every speculation. Catherine Jackson watched all of it, quietly, painfully, and patiently. She did not respond to every accusation. She did not engage in public arguments. She did not seek revenge. Instead, she continued to do what she had always done. She protected her son with dignity. She spoke when necessary. She defended him when required. She clarified misinformation when it threatened his legacy. But she never allowed herself to be consumed by anger or bitterness. She refused to let the world pull her into the same chaos that had tormented Michael. In this way, Catherine Jackson did not just save Michael's soul in life, she preserved it in death. She ensured that when people remembered Michael Jackson, they did not only remember the controversies, but also the compassion. Not only the headlines, but the humanity. Not only the rumors, but the reality. She reminded the world that behind every icon is a human being, fragile, complex, and deserving of empathy. And she reminded Michael Jackson's fans of something even more profound, that the greatest story of his life was not fame, but love. Because love was the one thing that never failed him. Not from his fans, not from his children, not from his music, and certainly not from his mother. There were moments when Catherine Jackson questioned herself. She wondered if she could have done more to protect Michael, if she could have intervened earlier, if she could have shielded him more effectively from the pressures of fame, the cruelty of the media, the exploitation of those who saw him not as a person, but as a product. But in her quiet moments of reflection, she came to a realization. She had done everything a mother could. She had loved him. She had believed in him. She had supported him. She had stood by him. She had protected his heart. And in a world that tried relentlessly to break him, that was everything. Michael Jackson did not survive because he was famous. He survived because he was loved. That love did not erase his pain, but it gave him a reason to keep going. It did not silence the world, but it gave him a voice to sing over the noise. It did not prevent his suffering, but it gave him a purpose beyond it. And that purpose lived on not just in his music, but in the lives he touched, the children he helped, the hearts he healed, and the family he left behind. Katherine Jackson often spoke about Michael as if he were still alive. Not in denial, but in continuity. She spoke of his values. She spoke of his humor. She spoke of his kindness. She spoke of his dreams. She spoke of his struggles. She spoke of his love. Because to her, Michael Jackson was not a memory, he was a presence. He lived in the songs played at family gatherings. He lived in the laughter of his children. He lived in the quiet prayers she whispered each night. He lived in the stories she told, not of fame, but of faith. Not of success, but of survival. Not of controversy, but of compassion. And in those stories, the true Michael Jackson emerged. Not the icon, not the myth, not the headline, but the son. A son who needed love. A son who needed protection. A son who needed a mother. And Katherine Jackson had never failed him. Even now, there is a moment rarely captured on camera when Katherine Jackson sits alone in her living room surrounded by photographs. Michael as a baby, Michael on stage, Michael laughing, Michael holding his children, Michael with his siblings, Michael with her. In those moments she does not cry loudly. She does not break down. Instead, she sits quietly, eyes fixed on the images, heart filled with memories. And sometimes she smiles. Not because she is not grieving, but because she is remembering. Remembering the boy who sang in the living room. Remembering the child who held her hand. Remembering the young man who sought her advice. Remembering the father who loved his children. Remembering the soul who trusted her more than anyone else. Remembering the son she saved, not from death but from despair. Because that is what truly matters. Not how Michael Jackson died, but how he lived. Not what the world said, but what his heart felt. Not the rumors, but the reality. And the reality is this. Michael Jackson was a man who endured unimaginable pressure, criticism, and loneliness. And yet, he never stopped trying to love, to heal, and to give. He never stopped believing in goodness. He never stopped believing in people. He never stopped believing in peace. And that belief came from one place, his mother. Katherine Jackson did not just raise a superstar. She raised a human being. A human being who felt deeply. A human being who loved fiercely. A human being who suffered quietly. A human being who survived because he was not alone. The world often wonders what Michael Jackson might have become if he had lived longer. Would he have released more music? Would he have gone on tour again? Would he have reinvented himself once more? Would he have healed further? Would he have found peace? The answers to those questions remain unknown. But one thing is certain. As long as Katherine Jackson was alive, Michael Jackson would never have been alone. Because even in death, she continued to speak to him. She continued to pray for him. She continued to love him. And that love, the kind that transcends time, fame, and even mortality, is what saved his soul. This story is not about a perfect mother. Katherine Jackson was not perfect. She made mistakes. She had fears. She had doubts. She had limitations. But she had love. And love, when it is unconditional, when it is unwavering, when it is selfless, becomes something far more powerful than perfection. It becomes salvation. Michael Jackson did not need a perfect world. He needed a perfect refuge. And he found that refuge in his mother. In her arms. In her prayers. In her voice. In her presence. In her love. The world may remember Michael Jackson as the king of pop, but Katherine Jackson remembered him as her son. And that is the most powerful title of all. Because fame fades, music evolves, trends change, but love remains. And in the end, it is love, not applause, not awards, not headlines, that defines a life. Michael Jackson's life was not defined by controversy. It was defined by courage, not defined by scandal, but by survival, not defined by fame, but by faith. And at the center of that faith was a mother who never stopped believing in him. This is the story the world rarely tells. This is the story that matters. This is the story of Michael Jackson and the mother who saved his soul. And if there is one lesson to carry forward from this story, it is this: no matter how loud the world becomes, no matter how heavy the burden, no matter how deep the pain, one voice of love can still change everything. One hand held in darkness can still bring light. One heart that refuses to give up can still save a soul. Michael Jackson's soul was saved not by fame, not by fortune, not by talent, but by a mother's love. And that love continues to echo through time, through music, through memory, through generations. A reminder that behind every legend is a human heart, and behind every surviving heart is someone who refused to let it break. If Michael Jackson's life teaches us anything, it is this: the greatest power in the world is not fame. It is love. And Katherine Jackson wielded that power with quiet strength, unshakable faith, and unconditional devotion. She did not just save her son. She saved a legacy. She saved a message. She saved a soul. And that soul continues to inspire millions, not because of how he danced, not because of how he sang, but because of how he loved. And behind that love was a mother who never let go. If this story moved you, inspired you, or changed the way you see Michael Jackson, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share, so more people can hear the human story behind the legend.